Welcome to the God Has Spoken podcast. As doubts about God's will arise, the world resorts to feelings and experts. We go to the law and to the testimony of God's word. In today's episode, we are in 2 Samuel 16. At this point in David's life, he is on the run from his son Absalom, who is in the middle of overthrowing him as king. As David flees, he encounters different people from his past. And in the middle of these stories, David is confronted with one side of a story and makes a decision before he hears the other side. Have we ever done that? And what can I do to be better about listening to all sides of a story before I make a judgment on a matter?
So I'd like for us to start with the story. This story has several characters in it, so we'll have to kind of keep track of where we're at. But David, the king, felt like he wanted to be a blessing to Saul, who he had taken over the kingship from. And he finds out that Jonathan has a son, Mephibosheth, who he could show kindness to. He could be a blessing to him. Jonathan had died when Saul died in battle. But Mephibosheth had a problem. He was crippled. He'd been dropped at a certain point in time, and therefore he couldn't walk. He couldn't do anything for himself. But David wanted to be gracious to Mephibosheth, so he blessed him. He gave Mephibosheth all the land that Saul had acquired, and he had his servant Ziba take care of the land. He couldn't work the land or anything, but Ziba could. And he had him sit at his table and eat meals with him and so forth. David was being very generous and gracious to Mephibosheth, wanting to show kindness to the family of Saul, and especially, of course, to Jonathan, who had been Mephibosheth's father. So we come down a ways in 2 Samuel. That was 2 Samuel 9. We come down to 2 Samuel chapter 16. Absalom, David's son, had conspired to become king. He was driving David and the loyalists to David out of Jerusalem. They were fleeing from Absalom, fleeing away from Jerusalem. And as David and his men fled, there were certain individuals that came and joined his army. One of them in 2 Samuel 16 is this Ziba, this servant of Mephibosheth who's working the land for him and so forth. And so I'd like for us to read a little bit of this. Would you read chapter 16, verses 1 to 4?
When David had gone a little beyond the summit, Ziba, Mephibosheth's servant, was right there to meet him. He had a pair of saddled donkeys loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 bunches of summer fruit, and a clay jar of wine. The king said to Ziba, "Why do you have these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride, the bread and summer fruit are for the young men to eat, and the wine is for those to drink who become exhausted in the wilderness." "Where is your master's grandson?" the king asked. "Why, he's staying in Jerusalem," Ziba replied to the king, "for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will restore my grandfather's kingdom to me.'"
Such an important moment in David's life as he's fleeing. He really needs resources. And Ziba comes and brings him a bunch of food and things like that he can feed the group of people that's leaving with him. There's a real blessing to him. And he's just giving them to David. He wants David to have them. David wonders why Mephibosheth isn't with him. And he tells him regretfully that he was decided to stay behind in Jerusalem. He thought that he could take advantage of the power vacuum, maybe to claim power for himself as Saul's grandson. Well, that's really annoying to think that after all David had done for Mephibosheth, taking care of him and being gracious to him, that he turns around and double crosses him and tries to get the kingship back. So David, assuming he eventually will become king again, says to Ziba, "Everything that I gave to Mephibosheth, it's yours now." Mm-hmm. He's taken it away from Mephibosheth and just really hurt by Mephibosheth's selfishness in this. Well, they go on into the wilderness. They get set up for battle. Absalom comes out with the troops. Absalom is killed. The Absalomites are defeated, and David becomes king again. And as he's coming back into Jerusalem to become king, a variety of people meet him, including Mephibosheth. And as he meets Mephibosheth, Mephibosheth is so glad he's back. It's just such an encouragement to him that David is back. And he, in verse 24, Mephibosheth comes to David. This is 2 Kings 19:24. And David asks him in verse 25, "Why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" Now look what he says. Would you read verse 26 to 30?
My lord the king, my servant Ziba betrayed me. Actually, your servant said, I'll saddle the donkey for myself, so that I may ride it and go with the king, for your servant is lame. Ziba slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like the angel of God, so do whatever you think best. For my grandfather's entire family deserves death from my lord the king, but you set your servant among those who eat at your table. So what further right do I have to keep on making appeals to the king? The king said to him, Why keep on speaking about these matters of yours? I hereby declare you and Ziba are to divide the land. Mephibosheth said to the king, Instead, since my lord the king has come to his palace safely, let Ziba take it all.
So this is a different take on this.
Mm-hmm.
When Mephibosheth comes out to meet David as he's coming back in victorious, he is so glad to see David, glad that he's back in the kingship. David's like, Mephibosheth, why didn't you go with me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he tells the story that Ziba double-crossed him and didn't set him up to be able to go, and he couldn't do it by himself without the servant's help because of his being crippled.
Right.
And he's just glad to see David. Well, now, that makes you really stop and think, wonder what really happened. You know, we've heard two totally different stories on this. And Ziba stood to profit by the story he made. Mephibosheth doesn't stand to get anything out of what he said. Mephibosheth doesn't seem interested in even getting the lands back. He's not worried about that. David says, I'll divide him 50-50 between you and Ziba. I think it really shows that David was probably wrong when he assumed Ziba told the truth. He probably needed to hear both sides before he acted. And because Mephibosheth was trying to get to David and do the right thing, he lost half of his possessions to Ziba in the final analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just interesting how that sometimes we act and speak too quickly. You know, we can assume something's right before we really check it out and act in an improper way. I'm thinking about Proverbs chapter 18.
I wondered if that's what you're thinking
Yeah.
about. So sometimes we act on an insufficient amount of facts.
Yes, because we haven't heard both sides, because we don't really know the whole story, we jump to conclusions.
Yeah.
You know, that's a pretty good exercise for us. We do a lot of jumping to conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Proverbs 18:13. Would you read that?
The one who gives an answer before he listens, this is foolishness and a disgrace for him.
Yeah, don't give the answer before you've really heard the story. Sometimes we're rather prideful about that. We think we can figure everything out without even knowing about the facts. Let's investigate before we make a decision. And look also at verse 17.
The first to state his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him.
Isn't that true?
Yes, I know it is. Yeah.
The guy's got a really bad speaking ability if he can't convince us that he's the first one to get to us.
Yeah.
But you don't know the truth until you hear the other side.
Yeah, and I will say that's sometimes what's challenging about debates. When I've listened to debates where I'm truly neutral on the issue, I listen to the one guy and I'm like, man, that makes a lot of sense. That's so true. Then the other guy starts talking and then I'm like, well, that guy's right. This guy is wrong. But by the end of it, because I've heard both sides, now it's just up to me to decide what I think is true.
So we've got to really be careful that when somebody presents a side to us, they're upset with somebody because of what they did to them or whatever, that we don't immediately side with the guy that we're listening to. We don't have a right to do that until we've heard the other side and we understand the whole situation, because it may totally change our perception.
Yeah. I think there's also something to be said here about often when someone is emotional and they're running to somebody to tell their version of the story, typically what you're hearing is an exaggerated version anyways.
Often it is.
And so even if you just take their word, it's likely not the full picture in and of itself. They're not getting every single detail right. You got to go hear the other side as well, and then even their version's going to be exaggerated, and the truth is somewhere in the middle.
So we've really got to slow down sometimes
Yeah.
and stop and listen and think and analyze and get information, get facts and details.
I think it's easy to get hyped up. Someone comes and tells us something, and we get all excited, and we just want to jump in and react, and
we do.
We need to slow down and listen.
Yeah, look at 19:2.
Even zeal is not good without knowledge, and the one who acts hastily sins.
Isn't that true?
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah, when we act hastily, it's not a good idea. Look at 21:5. The plans of the diligent lead surely to advantage, but everyone who is hasty comes surely to poverty. In fact, Proverbs is full of statements about being hasty. We just need to slow down and think. I'll give you another example. We won't look at this one in as much detail. But there was that time when Joshua and the Israelites were conquering the land of Canaan, and they were supposed to conquer all the Canaanites in the land. But if somebody came from a long ways off, they could make treaties with them. But anybody in the proximity of the land, they couldn't make a treaty with.
Right. So it
Remember
was
the story?
the Gibeonites,
That's
I'd
right.
imagine. They came and they acted like they like tore their clothes and they acted like they'd come from some faraway place.
That's right. Their clothes were new when they started out. The
Right.
bread was all moldy and tough and all, and they said it was fresh when we left, and made out as if they were from a foreign country for a long ways away. And Joshua, flattered by the fact that they've come from such a long distance to congratulate him and so forth, makes the deal with them without finding out more information, without consulting what God would want to say about it, and come to find out they're one of their nearest neighbors in the land, and now he's made an oath that he can't do anything about them.
Yep.
So it's just really a good lesson for us that we need to think before we speak, think before we act, listen to both sides before we form a conclusion. Hastiness almost always will get us in trouble.
Thank you for listening to the God Has Spoken podcast. If you'd like to leave a review, we would ask that you would do so in your preferred listening platform so that we can use this as an opportunity to reach those who would like to hear God's Word. And if you have any suggestions or comments for future episodes, feel free to send Gary an email at garyfisher1063@gmail.com. We hope you have a blessed day.